Hi, I'm Emily Wilmson, and welcome to Full Circle. We're here today to talk about transportation and sustainability, and I have a couple of guests today. With me are Timothy Wilder, who's the Service Development Manager for Transport. Welcome, Timothy.
Thank you.
And I have Paul Sizemore, who's our FC Moves Program Manager. Whoops. Welcome, Paul. Thanks for joining us. And so let's talk a little bit about transportation and sustainability. How does the city integrate those two subjects? Who wants to start with that one?
Sure. I think in terms of transportation, we'd like to look at our philosophy as being a holistic system that, incorporates all the modes of transportation within the city's functioning transportation system. That would include cars as well as bikes, as well as pedestrians, as well as transit vehicles within that system. And so the philosophy is one, in order to sustain the community development or the community as a whole, that all those different elements of transportation need to be realized, and infrastructure needs to be invested in all of those different types of modes. But I'm sure Paul can speak to that more eloquently than I can.
Right. Well, the city uses a triple bottom line approach to decision making, and basically what that means is that anytime we do a plan or have to make a major decision that will have impacts on the community, we have to consider the environmental, economic, and social impacts of that decision. And so you see this in the way that we do transportation planning. We take those concepts of sustainability and we consider them at the very beginning of the process, and then we use them again as part of our evaluation criteria when we're making decisions. On the environmental front, I think one of the really interesting things that's going on right now in Fort Collins is the development of a new climate action plan. And this will be completed, it's targeted for the end of the year. Environmental Services has been directed by City Council to pursue some very aggressive greenhouse gas reduction goals. And so because of the role that transportation plays in greenhouse gas emissions, we're very involved in that process, and we're kind of eagerly awaiting the outcome so that we can take those high-level strategies and drill down and start to develop some specific implementation items to help the city achieve its greenhouse gas reduction targets.
Okay, so help me understand a little bit, what is FC Moves exactly, and how do you fit into that picture?
Right, so that's a question that I answer a lot, because FC Moves it's a really cool name for a city department, but it's not very self-explanatory. Basically, what we are is we're a department within planning, development, and transportation, which is a service area. And we provide the long-range transportation planning services and also alternative modes planning and programming. So we provide long-range transportation planning, the Safe Routes to School program, and the FC Bikes program. It's really a very innovative structure to have these things grouped together in that way, because it speaks to the city's commitment to making sure that we include bicyclists and pedestrians in our long-range plans.
Okay, and so Timothy, how do you fit?
Well, I would add that, obviously Transport is the city's transit service provider, but there is some very close linkages with the FC Moves program and the other city departments. With FC Moves in particular, we have close connections because there's the first mile, last mile, and trying to get to the transit system, and people typically need a way to get to a particular bus stop. And so we really rely and work closely on FC Moves, provide that planning so that we could accommodate those riders onto the system, whether they be walking to a bus stop or whether they be riding their bikes to a bus stop. And so as we're looking at facilities for transport, we also need to be looking at not just for passengers, but where do people park their bikes, for example, or can they accommodate bikes on the buses, and or how can they, what kind of sidewalk is there to connect to a bus stop. So those are really critical for us in terms of achieving our full transit system.
Okay, great. And obviously you guys have had a big home run with MAX. Can you talk about?
Sure, yeah, it's been very successful. MAX, for those who don't know, is our latest bus service. It's bus rapid transit, which essentially means more frequent and better service than a typical bus route. Level boarding, so people don't have to walk up a set of steps to get onto the bus. Typically, fares are paid in advance of riding the bus. Overall, it's a more efficient system than a typical bus. So our experience so far, and this is only 3 months of operation, has been very successful. We've had an average of about 3,500 riders a day, which is on track for our projections. It's a very healthy ridership. The community seems genuinely excited about having the system in place. Most people are very happy with the way it's operating, and we will continue to make improvements over time. There's some improvements that need to be made with making the timings more efficient and some of the other system changes, but overall it's working very well.
And people will start paying for MAX on August 24th?
August 25th, that's Monday, August 25th,
okay.
Yeah. That date is important for Transport because that's the date in which we go ahead with other service changes, including additional service to CSU and some other route changes. But that's all a significant date where CSU is back in session, and that's the point at which we're going to start charging fares for the MAX system. And the fares are the same as on MAX as the rest of the Transport system, so there's no additional charge for riding MAX. But we are working on some communications around that. We've started the communications already, and we'll continue to reach out to the public so they know that, yeah, now you start paying your fares, and here's what to expect as you get on the buses.
So what's the next step for MAX? I mean, are you looking for a certain threshold of riders? Are you looking to expand service? Is there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to what I said earlier, and that is just making sure that we continue to work on some of the issues that we've experienced over the summer.
Okay.
Some of the major improvements that we're making are improving the intersections through the university, in which the bus has to stop at the intersection and wait for the cross traffic, and we're working on some improvements so the bus doesn't have to stop, that it could advance, and that will improve the timing of the buses. And some of the other intersections, we're working closely with traffic operations to make those changes. We're going to continue to make improvements to our rider tools that help people ride the MAX, including finally getting the Google Transit, which is a trip planning tool, realized for the community, and that's been a long and difficult effort for Transport. So we're happy to say that we're very close to making that happen now. So we're going to continue to make improvements, and I'm sure over the next year there will be additional things we'll see that we'll need to improve. Getting our additional 60-foot buses on the route will be something we'll be looking forward to also in the future to make sure that we have a sufficient service for those peak rider times where we have a lot of boardings.
Okay, great. So, Paul, back to you. We've talked a lot about buses. What about pedestrians and bicyclists? How do we, and I know they often end up on the buses, but what is our plan around the city for how we manage those populations, those folks?
Sure. Well, like I mentioned, the FC Moves model is really conducive to making sure that bicycles and pedestrians are taken into account in all of our planning efforts. Our plans and our actions are guided by a document called the Transportation Master Plan. And one of the themes in our current Transportation Master Plan is this concept of trying to achieve balance between all modes. And what we find often when we go in and we're doing an area plan or a corridor plan and looking at the transportation network is that the city's done a very good job of providing for the automobile, for single occupancy vehicles. The roadways are of a very high quality and cars experience a high level of service. Often though, we'll find that some of the other modes have fallen by the wayside over time. And so for pedestrians and cyclists and people trying to board transit, they may not be experiencing the same high quality level of service that you experience when you're in a car. And so we find that very often when we do a transportation plan, a focus of that plan is taking these other modes and finding ways to elevate their level of service so they're at least equal to the level of service that we provide for cars. One of the really exciting ways that we're doing this is through a concept called enhanced travel corridors. And the prime example of what an enhanced travel corridor looks like is actually the Mason corridor. At the time that corridor plan was developed, we hadn't come up with the term yet, but the concept is the same, which is you have a very high volume corridor, and there's an opportunity there to direct transportation investment so that you get a really a good bang for the buck when you invest those dollars and you're able to create an alternative to using the single occupancy vehicle. So in the case of the Mason corridor, by investing in the Mason Trail, we've raised the level of service for bicycles and pedestrians. And now by having MAX up and operational, there's also a high quality option for transit. And so you have multiple alternatives traveling north-south through the city to be able to use a variety of modes to get to your destination.
And this is where transit-oriented development comes into play, right? This is
I think the way to look at it is a complete system of community change. I suppose that's maybe the best term to use, where it can't just be one element of the community. For example, development. That development happens irrespective of what you do with your transportation system. It has to go hand in hand. So, all these plans that Paul is describing are ways to work with our comprehensive plan, frankly, and that's city plan, where it talks about the level of development through the community, intensifying our activity areas of the community. So we have specific areas that we expect would grow, and we'd provide additional housing and additional employment and activity in those specific areas. The transportation system really needs to be in place to support those, and that's what the transportation planning, FC Moves in particular, will do is to be involved in those discussions. So with the enhanced travel corridors, that they're placed appropriately so they can support that kind of development that's occurring. So, and I think we've done a very good job. I mean, Mason is the first example of that, and I think most people at the city and probably the community are pretty satisfied with the way that we've accomplished that. I think without knowing how it's going to work in Fort Collins, we're seeing that these systems are starting to work with the MAX, with some of the student housing that's being developed, the development downtown, that is starting to work together. People are riding the MAX. They're taking other modes. You see the trail is fully used now, the Mason Trail. I ride the Mason Trail quite a bit, and I see people riding up and down. It's very heavily used. So people are using the system. It's starting to be achieved. The question is, can we continue that success and apply it to the other areas of the community? And that's kind of where the long-range planning comes into play.
Okay, and so part of that includes keeping up with population growth, I assume. I know your previous job for you has included
long-range planning, right?
Yes, and being a demographer basically for the city. So where is our growth headed? How are we keeping up? How's our transportation planning keeping up with that growth?
It's a good question. We did our community planning, the city plan. We do about a 5-year cycle of updating that plan, and the last one was in 2010. I think 2011 is when it was approved. And as part of that effort, we did some projections, and these projections look at population and employment and how many people are expected to come into the community. And it's based on a lot of different factors, but essentially, as planners, we need to see ways that we can accommodate that population and that employment base. And so we're able to look ahead. We look out, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ahead and find out, okay, this is the kind of housing, this is the demographics that are coming into the community. Growth in seniors is a big one. We know that CSU and its student population is growing, so therefore those types of housing are going to be big needs. We know that families are shrinking, the family size is shrinking, and there are more of non-traditional families that are coming into our community. So all those are factors in terms of the type of housing and where people want to live, and also the kind of transportation system that they want to utilize. And I think now we're in a mode of, okay, looking at those factors and saying, okay, it's going to be different now and into the future than it was in the past. And we need to keep that in mind as we're doing our planning and implementation of those plans.
Okay.
Right, and the transportation master plan is the companion piece to the city's comprehensive plan to city plan. They're developed at the same time, and they have a feedback between them. So the land use assumptions that go into the comprehensive plan feed into the transportation side, and then the outputs from our transportation analysis also inform decisions that are made about land use. So while those documents are updated every 5 years or so, they're looking 20 or 25 years into the future. And in the transportation world, we've got a number of tools that we can use to analyze how things might change based on adjustments we might make to the transportation system, based on the population and demographic changes, which are outputs of the land use planning. The one that we use the most is called a travel demand model. And so this is a piece of software that's maintained regionally by the North Front Range Metropolitan Planning Organization and covers the whole North Front Range region. And we can use the portion of that model that applies to the city and do some analyses and make these adjustments and changes to see what the impacts would be in the future. But as Timothy mentioned, the future isn't necessarily going to be like the past, and so these models are largely based upon trends. So it's important to keep in mind that when we use something like the travel demand model, it is not in itself the plan. It's just one of the tools that we use for looking at the different options that are available, and we have to make a concerted effort to be consistent with the city's vision for land use and transportation and lay out the correct strategies to guide the city towards those objectives.
Okay. And do you take into account, a certain number of vehicles per family or bicycles or bicyclists per household, or how do you, how far down do you drill to get that kind of information?
Sure. All of those kinds of factors can be taken into account. There's a portion of the model that determines mode splits. And so different factors might play into the behavior that people have and the decisions they make, whether they take the bus or whether they hop in their car that day. And so that's going to be one of the really exciting exercises coming out of these new goals from the Climate Action Plan, is that we're going to have targets for greenhouse gas reduction. And the best way to achieve those is to shift trips that are currently being taken in single occupancy vehicles into other modes that don't emit any or as much greenhouse gases. And so we're going to have to develop strategies and figure out the proportions that need to shift in order to achieve those goals.
Yeah, it makes me think, if MAX is so popular, is there someday EastWest MAX that's planned, or a diagonal MAX?
Bring that in. Paul and I have worked actually closely on looking ahead and finding out what the next corridor could be. And he already mentioned the enhanced travel corridors, and that's part of the same concept that the MAX and the Mason corridor have achieved. And what's the next? Where's the future? And from Transport's perspective, we have considerable ridership that is centered around CSU, and that's for obvious reason, that students ride the system more than any other group in town, and that will just continue. So for us, and we've worked on a budget offer to look at the West Elizabeth corridor as a possible future corridor. But there are others out there that were also looked at. The Harmony Road Paul's group looked at Harmony Road and different modes and how those could be achieved there as well. So there are certainly other areas that we'd be looking at in terms of trying to use the same type of approach as the Mason corridor.
So that makes me think there are probably people in the community who are trying to find out, when will I get bus service, or how is my area viewed? I mean, how do you break the city up into quadrants and look at population growth, or how do you determine when it's time to expand a service, or when it's, when there's a need for another, more of a transportation plan in a certain area, or anything that
Yeah,
sparks that?
I'll let Paul talk about the specific transportation planning. Just to speak to the transit portion of it. I think we've always been a little bit behind the 8 ball in terms of the amount of services that people are demanding, and I think with the MAX we're finally able to provide a service at the level that people are asking for, and so for us that's very exciting. It's very great to see that people are using it like we had hoped, and that certainly could be a model used for our other services, because we certainly have a complete system, but it's just not at the same level as the MAX system. So we look ahead and we're excited about when FC moves and Paul's group does another corridor plan and how we can also achieve additional services as part of that planning effort.
Right, and I think the kinds of decisions you're talking about are a good example of the times where it's important to have your shorter term actions really guided by a longer term vision. Because when we do these really longer range studies and we look at the entire network and the way that it works together, when you're looking 25 years in the future, you can kind of identify those places that are going to require the most investment. And transportation infrastructure is very expensive, and so you don't want to misdirect that investment. And so when we come out of a longer range transportation plan, we'll usually have implementation items that kind of lay out a course of action for us, steps to take in the interim. And so those guide really our work plan on an annual basis. We look to our long-range planning documents, and they tell us, well, in the long term, these are the corridors that we need to focus on. And so we start taking those one at a time and developing more refined plans. And then those refined plans eventually go into a stage of design and seeking funding and become a reality.
Okay, I'm glad you pointed out the cost of these things. I know there was recently discussion about expanding MAX to Sunday, and there's a real cost associated with that.
Absolutely, yeah. There's, it's a difficult conversation because these do require significant resources, especially for transit. It's, other than, a lot of the other modes where you have a capital investment, but maybe less maintenance. With the transit operations, obviously you have considerable ongoing costs that are part of that, and that's just the way we like to look at it. Is this is a multiple benefits for the community. We bring this back to sustainability. So even if you're not using the transit system, you are benefiting from some of the investments that are made in the transit system. So, for example, for the MAX, if now that there's a person that's no longer driving their car on College Avenue, they're riding the MAX, well, that's one less car on College Avenue that you're having to deal with in traffic. So there are multiple benefits, and but we do also need to realize the costs are significant and go through a community conversation. Is that where we want to put our resources into? Is this the appropriate infrastructure investment that we should make?
Yeah. Plus, you get to avoid all the construction that's going on around
town.
Yeah. That's the one thing I remember from MAX opening is, hey, you never have to worry about construction on the MAX line, right? So
that's right.
Anyway, so great. Well, as we're wrapping up here, any last thoughts about, do you have a wish list or anything you'd like to leave our viewers with?
Well, I guess I'll just say that it's a really exciting time to be working in transportation, and I think in planning in general in the city of Fort Collins. We've got a lot of great projects going on. The city has really shown its commitment to sustainable transportation options. Right now we're designated as a platinum bicycle-friendly community and a bronze walk-friendly community. And so every day I just encourage people to go out and to really take advantage and make use of the great infrastructure and the programming that the city has out there. Try going for a walk to your destination, or taking a bike, or taking one of the transport buses. And you may find an option that fits really well with your lifestyle.
Great. Well, thank you.
Yeah, I would echo what Paul said. I would also suggest that the community as a whole has done some great planning over the years, and we're seeing those being realized, and that's really unusual for most communities where they do the planning, they may do the implementation, but it's separate, it's not as linked, or they may do a plan and it gets set on the shelf. Here in Fort Collins, we've been very serious about our plans, and they do mean something. And so as the community participates, you know, yeah, it does take, sometimes it takes 5, 10, 20 years, but with projects like the Mason Corridor, that has been, what, a 10, 15-year process, it comes to fruition. So that's the exciting thing about working, living, playing in Fort Collins, is that you actually get to be part of these things, and it's not just, oh, my comment goes nowhere and, you know, nobody hears about it, but it does get implemented in the end. So that's the exciting thing, I think, about being part of this community for me.
Great, awesome. Well, thank you, Timothy, and thank you, Paul. Appreciate you both being here. And that's it this time on Full Circle. We'll see you next month.